It was April in the year 2001, a little over a month before my 21st birthday, and I sat down in front of the TV in the living room of the apartment I shared with my best friend at the time and his girlfriend at the time to watch the new David Copperfield TV special, Tornado of Fire. Unlike Copperfield's previous TV specials, the big illusion being sold as the main event for this one wasn't an illusion at all, but a stunt. Copperfield was going to stand in the center of a contraption that would blast fire up all around him at wind speeds, supposedly the equivalent of an F2 tornado. To survive, he would have to find the center of this mighty tornado of fire and remain in it until the flames had stopped. And that's what he did, and it was all over in a few seconds. Not really a trick, not one of his bait and switch illusions where you're set up to expect one thing only for it to turn out to be something else, like the death saw, which is presented as an escape before turning into a cutting someone in half trick, and not a genuine escape act either. Copperfield's not trying to free himself and get away before the fire starts. Him being there at the same time as the fire is the whole point. I'm not saying it wasn't impressive in its way, and Christ knows I'd never try it, but as the big finish for a magic show by the guy known for amazing feats of grand illusion, There was something else that felt slightly off about that special as well, something that nagged at me back then when I watched it for the first time, and was then confirmed many years later when I got a bootleg DVD set of all the Copperfield TV specials. There's never been an official home video release, and watched the Tornado of Fire special again. That was back in my early 30s. I'm now in my mid-40s, and I've watched the Tornado of Fire special along with the others a bunch of times since then, because the thing is, David Copperfield has been my favorite magician for pretty much my entire life. And that being the case, I can tell you that there is something odd about that Tornado of Fire special, something that isn't present in the other specials, something that makes that special extremely uncomfortable to watch at certain points in light of some things that have more recently come to light. David Copperfield is in the Epstein Files. In case you didn't know, that's what I'm getting at. Well, that's part of what I'm getting at. He's also been accused of sexual misconduct related to matters outside of the Epstein Files. I should say, having one's name appear in the Epstein Files, as David Copperfield's does hundreds of times in the documents released by the Justice Department, does not mean one has done anything wrong. And David Copperfield has consistently denied any wrongdoing related to Jeffrey Epstein, as well as any accusations of sexual misconduct made against him apart from the Epstein Files. I should also say that David Copperfield was investigated on suspicion of sexual misconduct by the FBI beginning in 2007, and after more than 2 years, the investigation was closed, and Copperfield has, to date, never been charged with a crime. Most of the Tornado of Fire special is excellent. Unlike Copperfield's previous TV specials, which featured illusions performed on a stage in a conventional theater setting, this one has him performing in the round with the audience on all sides. Not only does it make the magic seem that much more impressive, as there are fewer places to hide gimmicks and secrets, it's also just a really cool look when you're watching it on TV. And this special was recorded at the Mid-South Coliseum in Memphis, Tennessee, a historic venue for many reasons, but especially significant to pro wrestling fans like me, since it was the site of weekly shows in the Memphis wrestling territory for 20 years. It's kind of cool to think that David Copperfield was levitating people from the same spot where Terry Funk once tried to gouge out Jerry Lawler's eye with a piece of broken 2x4. Is Jerry Lawler in the Epstein Files? I'm actually kind of surprised. I guess Epstein wasn't a wrestling fan. Anyway, David Copperfield's Tornado of Fire show includes some of the best work out of all of his TV specials. His entrance is gracefully simple. a sheet falls from the ceiling and is then lifted up to reveal Copperfield standing on a previously empty platform being held up by some assistants. There's that trick where he cuts himself in half with a laser and walks around with his upper body hanging onto his legs. There's a cool levitation variant involving audience members seatbelted onto a couch. There's a really lovely bit of sleight of hand where he finishes by producing live goldfish. There's a trick where he vanishes 13 people at once, which years later would become the subject of a lawsuit when Copperfield performed the trick in his Las Vegas stage show, and one of the people getting vanished fell and got injured. Seems to go smoothly here, though. And there's Copperfield's celebrated portal illusion, which is the big finish of the stage portion of the show, the last trick before we cut to the tornado of fire stunt. The portal illusion is a really wonderful piece. A complex, technically ingenious, artful, moving bit of magic. Sure, the ending where the long-lost father and son are reunited is schmaltzy, but that's classic Copperfield. He's always been corny as hell. I don't mind corny Copperfield. I do, however, have some misgivings about horny Copperfield. Following the cuts himself in half with a laser and walks around like that trick, Copperfield does a bit where he selects two young women from the audience and magically makes their underwear switch places.
The object is to make Jessica's white underwear disappear and reappear on Celinda, and make Celinda's red underwear disappear and reappear on Jessica. I'm so happy.
And look, I'm not a prude, okay? Quite the opposite. I instinctively rebel against efforts to make everything safe and sexless and family-friendly, leaving the troubling implications of his association with Jeffrey Epstein and the sexual misconduct allegations made against him aside. If David Copperfield wants to do a sexy magic trick, I've got no problem with that. In fact, prior to the Tornado of Fire special in 2001, David Copperfield did a whole bunch of sexy magic tricks. He got up close and personal with lots of sexy ladies. Sexy, flexible ladies, and I had no problem with any of it. Sure, some of these illusions are easy to laugh at because of how self-serious they are, because of how hard Copperfield is trying to be smoldering and intense, but they don't give me the creeps. They don't seem like Copperfield is using the magic trick as a pretext to live out some pervy fantasy. This, however, well, I just said it. This feels pervy. In those other sexy tricks, Copperfield was trying to project an image of confidence and strength and maturity. Here, he spends the whole trick giggling like a hormonal teenager, an affect made even more uncomfortable by the fact that when he made this special in 2001, he was only 2 years younger than I am as I sit here right now. When a 14-year-old behaves like a randy teenager, that's expected. When a 44-year-old does, that's fucking creepy.
These are labels. I need to get these labels on their underwear. I can do it the hard way or the easy way. It's your choice, hard or easy. Hard, so dinner first.
Also, did you see that little grin and giggle he did at the end there? He does that over and over again throughout the trick, and actually throughout the entire show. He's always saying something suggestive and then doing one of those "ain't I a stinker" takes, and I think he's aiming for cute and mischievous, but it makes everything he does feel lecherous and gross.
Give me your hands, close your eyes, think happy thoughts. I am.
The main part of the trick is a variation on the old dancing hanky effect, with underwear playing the role of the hanky this time. On its own, it's charming and a little risque. He's making their panties dance. How scandalous! But the overall routine is spoiled by Copperfield's insistence on perving it up at every opportunity. Then, when it's over, and everyone's underwear has been returned to its proper place and the two young women are safely back in their seats, Copperfield announces to the audience that he is about to perform the trick on a large scale. He declares that he has just made everyone's underwear disappear. And to prove it,
reach down into your neighbor's pants. Do it! In the White House they used to do it. Follow the leader! You could be president.
I'll allow his underwhelming impression of Chris Rock making fun of racist white people belittling Colin Powell to pass without comment.
I be Prezzo dead.
And point out that David Copperfield recorded this special in January 2001, and as I said at the beginning, it was originally broadcast in the United States in April 2001. The Bill Clinton presidency was over, and the Monica Lewinsky affair was several years in the past and no longer a hot topic of conversation for most people, and yet Copperfield was so determined to make that joke that he rewrote it as "in the White House they used to do it," just so he could shoehorn it into his act. Also, he demanded that the audience reach into their neighbor's pants, which obviously it was a joke, but you know. A search for the name David Copperfield and the Epstein Files made available on the Justice Department website yields a total of 438 results. Even after accounting for the number of these results that are duplicates, as well as the ones that refer to the Charles Dickens novel David Copperfield, and not the magician David Copperfield, that still seems like a lot. When his name came up in a batch of court documents related to Epstein that were released in 2024, Copperfield's lawyers told The Guardian that he had no knowledge of Epstein's crimes, that they were not close, and that communication between the two was limited to requests Epstein had made for tickets to Copperfield's show. Copperfield did visit Epstein's homes in Palm Beach, Florida, and New York City, but these visits have been characterized less as social occasions and more like paid gigs, where Copperfield would arrive to perform for Epstein and his guests and then leave, though he did stick around for dinner on at least one occasion in 2004. That same year, Copperfield also conducted Epstein on a tour of his magic warehouse in Las Vegas. Epstein was accompanied by a group of young women, at least one of whom he later sexually assaulted. She was 15 at the time. Copperfield's lawyers say he didn't see or have any reason to suspect anything inappropriate was going on during the tour. In 2007, the FBI opened an investigation following an accusation from a woman that David Copperfield had sexually assaulted her on Musha Key, the private island he owns in the Bahamas, not to be confused with Little St. James, the private island Jeffrey Epstein owned in the U.S. Virgin Islands. During the course of that investigation, as we now know from the Epstein files that have been released by the Justice Department, FBI agents uncovered evidence of what they called a clear connection between Copperfield and Epstein. Message logs taken from Epstein's Palm Beach mansion by police in 2005 show that, during a 3-month period beginning in late November 2004, Copperfield called and left messages for Epstein 16 times. Some of these messages appear to be related to requests for show tickets, but others record Copperfield saying he just called to say hello. One from late January 2005 reads simply, "It's jackpot." Later in the Tornado of Fire special, right after that lovely sleight of hand routine with the goldfish, Copperfield performs an illusion which he calls the voyeur. Of all the original illusions in this show, it's the most reminiscent of something you'd have seen during Copperfield's heyday in the 80s and 90s. There are two beautiful young women who vanish behind a sheet, then reappear seemingly out of nowhere on another part of the stage. There are elements of dance and theater, but the actual magical effect appears elegant and uncomplicated. It's sexy in a non-creepy way. Sure, it's all very male gaze-oriented, but at least Copperfield isn't leering or raising his eyebrows and smirking like a guy who's about to be kicked out of the strip club. In this case, the skeevy part is the setup. Before the trick, Copperfield explains that once he was walking down the street and looked through a window and saw two people sitting alone in a room. In his imagination, he entered the room with them and became a part of the story, hence the title, The Voyeur. Did he really have to tell us that part? Without the added context of the Epstein connections and the other sexual misconduct allegations, I guess it's not that bad. It's possible to walk down the street and glance through a window and see people on the other side and let your imagination conjure up a scenario involving them without any sinister intent. I try to avoid it myself. I wouldn't want a stranger looking through my windows and seeing me in the privacy of my home. They don't need to know how emotionally invested I get in 30-year-old episodes of Baywatch I've seen multiple times. Maybe this time Stephanie won't get crushed by that broken mast. But incidental looks through a window as you're passing by don't necessarily make you a sex criminal. If you have been accused of being a sex criminal, and evidence exists that at one time you were at the very least a friendly acquaintance of the most notorious sex criminal of the past few decades, however, I based this illusion on this one time I looked through someone's window and imagined us all doing a sexy magic trick together story, it's a little different. Through their investigations into David Copperfield's ties to Jeffrey Epstein for The Guardian, journalists Stephanie Kirchgassner and Lucy Osborne write that they have found no evidence of interactions between Copperfield and Epstein before 2004 or after 2005. However, it's clear from the files released by the Justice Department that Epstein continued to purchase tickets to Copperfield's shows for at least another 10 years after that. Kirchgassner and Osborne write that Epstein apparently liked to give David Copperfield tickets as gifts to the girls he was abusing. One of the documents in the Epstein Files is this email from October 2007. The sender and recipient are both redacted, but it was written by someone with knowledge of the FBI investigations into both Copperfield and Epstein, which were ongoing at the time. It mentions a search of Copperfield's warehouse and refers to Copperfield as Epstein's favorite cohort. It claims that Copperfield spoke with girls at Epstein's place on several occasions, and that tickets and backstage passes to Copperfield's show were one of Epstein's favorite birthday gifts to give to his victims. There's also an email from September 2008 from Susan Rowe, an assistant U.S. attorney working on the FBI's Copperfield investigation, to Anne-Marie Villafana, an assistant U.S. attorney on the Epstein investigation, in which Rowe mentions a former assistant of Copperfield who, quote, organized and compiled the most recent version of The Girl Book, which has specific directions, pictures, and diagrams of how to spot attractive women, separate them from their friends and family, spin them the story of modeling or promotional work for him, reassure them of his honorable intentions, etc. The woman who accused Copperfield of sexually assaulting her on Musha Key, whose allegations prompted the FBI to begin its investigation of Copperfield in 2007, claims she was lured to the island with promises of modeling and promotional work. In the international version of the Tornado of Fire special, which includes around half an hour of material that wasn't included in the show when it was broadcast in the United States, David Copperfield performs a mind-reading illusion with a woman from the audience. He asks her to select a card from a stack of cards that each have different images related to the moon. Then he reads her mind to determine which moon she has selected. Seems to get it wrong, then magically makes the right moon appear on a sheet of paper. It's a pretty cool trick. Like I said, it wasn't included in the version of the show I originally watched back in 2001, but when I did finally see it, when I watched the international version, which was included in that bootleg box set I illegally purchased far enough in the past that the statute of limitations has long since expired, I recognized the trick because Copperfield had previously performed it in 1990 as part of his Niagara Falls Challenge special, only using playing cards instead of moon cards. Actually, the cards aren't the only difference between the two versions of the trick. So the idea is that the woman from the audience chooses a card and David reads her mind to find out what the card is and draws his prediction of what the card is on a big pad. They stand back to back, cheek to cheek, as he puts it, and then David calls for mind-reading music, and the song What's on Your Mind, Pure Energy by Information Society plays, and David and the woman from the audience dance back and forth across the stage while he draws his prediction. It's cute and mildly saucy. David asks the woman to put her hand on his leg, and when they finish dancing, he says, "That's not my leg." Oh my. And the big finish where the correct card magically rises up on the sheet of paper where David has drawn his prediction is still astounding to watch. It's a very cool effect. But in the version on the Tornado of Fire special, as they're dancing back and forth, David declares, "This is Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky." And then he uses the magic marker in his hand to pantomime a cigar. Why was he still so hung up on Clinton Lewinsky jokes in 2001? Even Jay Leno had moved on by then, hadn't he? I'm genuinely asking. I don't know. You couldn't have paid me to watch Jay Leno's Tonight Show. Not only is the material stale, the joke is barely a joke. They're walking back to back from one side of the stage to the other. Nothing about it is remotely suggestive of the Clinton-Lewinsky affair. But for some reason, David Copperfield just had to force this outdated non-joke into his cute little mind-reading trick, which, aside from the moon cards, was otherwise unchanged from the first time he did it on TV in 1990. Was he trying to update it? With a Monica Lewinsky joke that all but the laziest cruise ship comedians had dropped from their act by then? Again, not necessarily damning to the man's moral character, except for the Epstein connection and the sexual misconduct allegations. Am I reading too much into this? Am I allowing my knowledge of the association with Epstein and the other allegations to warp my perception of the Tornado of Fire special in hindsight? Am I being unfair to David Copperfield? The Tornado of Fire special was produced and broadcast in 2001, the earliest direct contact between Copperfield and Epstein for which there is known to be evidence didn't occur until 2004. The alleged sexual assault on Musha Key that led to the FBI investigation didn't occur until 2007. Besides, didn't that investigation end with no charges being filed? Doesn't David Copperfield deserve the presumption of innocence? Another of the documents in the most recent release of the Epstein Files from the Justice Department is an FBI memo from December 2007. This memo, also referenced in the reporting by Kirch, Gassner, and Osborne for The Guardian, requests authority to send agents from the Seattle office, where the Copperfield investigation was being conducted, to Miami to interview witnesses, two of whom have also been identified as witnesses by the Miami office's investigation into Epstein. The memo refers to evidence seized during searches of Copperfield's warehouse, residence, and the theater where he performs, evidence which establishes a clear connection between Copperfield and Epstein, which the memo says requires further investigation. The memo also refers to a 13-year gap in Copperfield's records from 1993 to 2005. This time period is reflective of the time period in which Epstein would have likely become aware of the investigation into his alleged sexual misconduct, the memo says. Did the connection between David Copperfield and Jeffrey Epstein begin before 2004? Perhaps many years before? That's speculation. We don't know. We may never know. There don't appear to be witnesses or other evidence establishing an association between the two of them before 2004 or after 2005. But that 13-year gap in Copperfield's records, it might not mean anything, but it looks awfully convenient. As for the FBI investigation of Copperfield related to the 2007 accusation of sexual misconduct on Musha Key, it's true that the investigation was eventually closed, with no charges being filed. In 2012, Oprah Winfrey interviewed Copperfield and asked him about the investigation and the accusation, and he claimed that he had been exonerated, which isn't exactly true. The investigation did close without charges, and the woman who accused him was later charged herself with making a false statement to a public servant in another case, but the FBI agents and U.S. attorneys who worked on the investigation never said, either publicly or in any of the internal documents that have since been made public, that Copperfield was innocent. Among the documents in the Epstein Files is this memo dated November 2019, subject line, Copperfield and Epstein. The sender and recipient are redacted, but the author speaks as someone who worked on the FBI's investigation into Copperfield. They write, "Our case was eventually closed because our USAO, that's U.S. Attorney's Office, was weak and intimidated by the financial resources of Copperfield. Admittedly, the victim had issues, and the jurisdictional issues were challenging." That doesn't sound like an exoneration to me. But even if it was, that only exonerates David Copperfield from one of the sexual misconduct accusations that have been made against him. There are others. In 2024, Gassner and Osborne wrote a piece for The Guardian reporting that Copperfield has been accused of sexual misconduct by at least 16 different women. More than half of the allegations are from women who said they were under 18 at the time of the incidents. Some said they were as young as 15, although he may not have known their ages. The allegations against him include claims that he drugged 3 women before he had sexual relations with them, which they felt they were unable to consent to. These are allegations. Copperfield has never been charged with a crime. Copperfield denies doing anything wrong with any of these 16 women or with anyone else, for that matter. They're all just making it up. 16 women accusing David Copperfield of an assortment of sex-related offenses, the earliest allegedly taking place in 1988, the most recent in 2014, and the way out of this, for Copperfield, the version of events that exonerates him, is that all 16 of these women are lying. It's certainly possible, but is it reality? I guess my fear is that the off-putting, sexually charged weirdness that Copperfield suddenly exhibits in his 2001 Tornado of Fire special is some kind of veiled confession, you know? If Copperfield really is of a kind with Epstein and Donald Trump and other such wealthy, abusive men, perhaps he shares not only their desire to control and assault women and girls, but their need to tell other people about it. Trump is infamous for brazenly bragging about his ability to abuse people, specifically women, with impunity. And as for Epstein, much of what is contained in the files released by the Justice Department is material produced by him or people close to him. Emails, photographs, documenting his crimes. Is that what Copperfield is doing in the Tornado of Fire special? With the random out-of-place Monica Lewinsky jokes? With that seemingly compulsive, impish smile? Is he hiding his offenses in plain sight? Waving them in front of our faces, daring us to notice, convinced we never will? Or is he merely an aging entertainer, trying too hard to seem hip and edgy? I hope it's the second one. Among the photographs released in the Epstein Files is this shot of David Copperfield and Ghislaine Maxwell, the former girlfriend and longtime close associate of Epstein, who is currently serving a 20-year sentence for sex trafficking in federal prison. There's also this one. And this one. The photographs are undated, but judging by Copperfield's appearance, they look like they were taken sometime in the early 2000s. The 2004-2005 period where we know Copperfield and Epstein were in contact is plausible. There are no notes accompanying the photos indicating a location, but according to Gassner and Osborne, from the background, they appear to have been taken on Little St. James, Epstein's Island. The theme of the Tornado of Fire special is your perfect place. Throughout the show, David Copperfield invites the audience there in the arena and watching on TV to imagine our perfect place. His final illusion for the live audience is his portal effect, where Copperfield appears to magically teleport from the arena in Memphis to his perfect place, taking a young man from the audience with him to reunite that young man with his estranged father. It is corny, but it's also beautiful. Beautiful in its conception, construction, and performance, and beautiful in its central idea. It's David Copperfield doing what he's always done, what has made him synonymous with his art form, what has made him a billionaire. He's showing us something wonderful, something magical, and asking us to believe in it. But no matter how meticulously crafted or skillfully performed the illusion is, only a fool or a child would truly believe it was real. That's the magic of David Copperfield. The reality of David Copperfield is the tornado of fire. A man standing in the center of an inferno he created, protecting himself, trying not to get burned, waiting for the storm to pass. Maybe it's an escape act after all. I've been a lover of magic for as long as I can remember, but it's never been one of my consuming passions. I know something about it and about how it's done. I'm familiar, at least on a basic level, with most of the essential methods for creating magical effects. I can't actually do them. Mastering even rudimentary sleight of hand moves takes many, many hours of practice, and I've never had the interest or the discipline necessary for that. One of the only tricks I can actually do is this one, where the rubber band starts out wrapped around these two fingers and then, with a wave of my hand, jumps to these two fingers. I learned that when I was a kid from watching David Copperfield.